Yellow and red mixed by digits 27 in chapter 50. Yes, Naruto. For the last time, I understand that 2 Suna Shinobi will be coming to pick up 3 of your companions in 3 days' time. Naruto nodded just to make sure that the Raikage understood him. So your ninja won't attack them or try to harass them, the Raikage sighed. Why was it that any conversation with the blind Jinchuriki in front of him seemed to drag on endlessly? You know, Naruto, Suna and Kumo are allies now. We don't just attack our allies without provocation. Naruto raised a brow, smirking as he recalled some things he had learned during his world studies. So, what was that incident with the Hyuga clan a few years ago? The Raikage coughed, blinking a few times at the unpredictable ninja in front of him. Yes, well, that was more than a few years ago, and was under my father's rule as Raikage. I'll show you. You got no such thing I'll show you that no such thing will happen as long as I'm in charge. Naruto just smiled and nodded. He was only teasing the man after all. It always amused him that he could so easily get under the intimidating Raikage's skin, even if he was one of the few he actually showed verbal respect to. However, that was really more out of fear of the man's iron claw technique. He shuddered just thinking about it. That's all right, Raikage-sama. Just worried about my friends is all. The Raikage relaxed back into his comfortable chair and nodded with an uncharacteristic smile. When he was alone with Naruto, who wouldn't dare breathe a word of the large man's soft side, he could relax and be the caring brother he was to be. Understandable, Naruto. Don't worry. When Gurren, Yukimura, and Gozu's escorts arrive, they will be welcomed in. Naruto smiled warmly and nodded before deciding to turn to lighter news. So I heard B Sensei got, and both were suddenly interrupted as an Anbu member burst into the room, quite literally as he was blown through the wall of the Rakage's office. Both A and Naruto stared incredulously at the man's crumpled form before Naruto rushed over, making sure he was okay. He had left a fairly large dent in the wall and must have a few cracked ribs, but otherwise he was okay. Raikage-sama, it's the poor Anbu member had to stop to cough as his body shook from exertion. It's Akatsuki. They went after Yujito Senpai. Both A and Naruto's eyes narrowed as they heard the organization's name. Naruto carefully laid the man's head down, now unconscious, and stood back up. He only knew of one member of the Akatsuki that would be displeased about their arrival, Hidan. Before the Raikage could even put a hand to stop him, Naruto had jumped out of the hole in the wall, making a beeline for where he knew Tayuya would be. Yujito raced to the narrow tunnel of the catacomb, just barely staying ahead of her pursuers. She glanced behind her, only to see the glint of red steel with force, which forced her feet to naturally quicken their pace. Reaching a more open area where water peacefully trickled through, she leapt to the side, narrowly dodging the head of the tri-bladed scythe before it smashed into the floor. Her body gracefully arched through the air before landing on the surface of the water and skidding back. She stayed at the side, still embedded in the floor of the tunnel, glinting in the weak light as the cable it was attached to slowly reeled in, signifying the approach of its master. Yujito watched, making her panic as best she could, as two figures slowly emerged out of the darkness into the tunnel, while walking like they had all the time in the world. The first, a smirking man with greasy, slicked back silver hair. It was connected to the scythe by a cable that disappeared into the sleeve of his robe. He wore it open at the front to reveal his bare chest. Yujito knew from what Naruto and Tayuya told her that this was the Akatsuki member known as Hidan. The second, a more stoic and mysterious man with a towering presence that had the strangest eyes Yujito had ever seen. The sclera seemed naturally red with a dark green iris and no pupils. He wore a hood and face mask that managed to cover most of his face, and his robe, identical to that of his partner, was equally concealing. This was Kakuzu, a man who had gone toe-to-toe with the first Hokage himself and survived him. Let's just finish this. His voice was deep and gravelly, fitting the intimidating persona his towering build gave him. Not just yet. Hidan, on the other hand, had a much more irritating, overconfident voice. Watching his generally vain appearance, he pulled out a strange amulet, a circle with a triangle inside, letting it turn hypnotically in his hand. Before that, I have another with whom I must confer. He smiled as he held the dull metal amulet up his face, causing his partner to look around at him. You can be such a pain in the neck sometimes. Kakuzu was obviously used to these situations. It didn't make him any happier about it, though. You can be such in the pain in the neck sometimes. Kakuzu was obviously used to these situations. It didn't make him any happier about it, though. It's a pain for me to but the laws are very strict about this. Yujito was almost shocked as the man brought the pendant up to his neck in his closed hands, almost making it look like he was praying. Instead, she simply smirked. The two had walked right in here without a second thought, with no regard to the fact that she had planned it all along. You idiots! You think you have me trapped? Well, I'm the one who trapped you. And she clapped her hands together and focused her chakra. Immediately, everybody in the room heard the hissing as multiple explosive tags were set off. They exploded, showering debris and rocks through the area, sealing off all the tunnels in or out the hall. Well, would you look at that? We walked into a trap, Kakuzu. His partner just looked around, completely ignoring the tense Yujito. No matter, this makes things even better. Hidan looked equally confident, although he did seem slightly agitated. This whole mission just goes against my beliefs. There's a rule in Joshism preventing us from leaving survivors. To resist destroying you is a huge struggle for me. Come on, why don't you just surrender and come with us? Yujo looked at him like he was crazy. An increasingly likely conclusion, or given the evidence, she had enough of this. She wasn't here to negotiate with the Katsuki. She was here to make sure these two would never hurt anybody again. And she dropped down to the surface of the water on all fours. The winds and water picking up and spinning around her in a small tornado as all her internal energy was released outwards. She could already feel the familiar blue flames lighting at her body, just waiting to be released and given form. She was about to do just that, to unleash the power of her Biju on these idiots, but was rudely interrupted as the entire hall shook violently. Both Jujito and the Katsuki members looked around in confusion as the tremor stopped and dust settling around the ceiling. They heard it again, a dull, muffled thump that caused the entire room to shudder, releasing more dust from the ceiling. It repeated again, louder, and the room shook even more, a fine layer of debris now coating everything as it was disturbed. Now they could see a crack appear on the roof, spattering out more and more as the crashes continued. With one final ear-splitting crack, the ceiling finally gave way under pressure, splitting open before showering the room in chunks of concrete and dirt. Yujito coughed and tried to wave away the cloud of rubble obscuring her view, wondering if this was some kind of ploy. However, when the smoke cleared enough, she looked up, only to see the smirking face of one Naruto Uzumaki, flanked on both sides by Taiya and Guren. All three quickly dropped into the cavernous hall as the makeshift smoke screen cleared out away, revealing an irritated Kakuzu and an almost gleeful Hidan. Yes, Justin-sama, be praised. Now I can finally fulfill my religious duties and cause some chaos. I might have to capture that heathen over there, but I have neither qualms or restraints in killing all of you. Naruto looked back calmly, standing firm with his arm crossed over his chest, a coat flapping in the breeze his entrance had created. Yujito, while annoyed that she had to be rescued, was gracious for the help, even if Naruto was now putting two Jinchuriki on the line instead of just her. To you, Guren, Yujito, you deal with Kakuzu. He smiled viciously as his canine elongated subconsciously. I'll deal with Hidan. Hidan's gleeful smile didn't dissipate in the slightest. In fact, he seemed even happier at this turn of events. That's right, come and fight, Blondie. Let me bask in your pain as I slowly draw each and every last breath out of your heathen body. Naruto settled into a defensive taijutsu stance and made the universal sign for come get some. Hidan screamed out in delight before fully retracting his special scythe and charging the calm Jinchuriki, not to dodge the first sloppy swing, but his abilities in evasion were quickly put to the test as the Jashin follower madly swung the weapon without abandon. While disorganized and unrefined, Hidan's attacks came with unparalleled ferocity and tenacity, giving them a chaotic elegance. Naruto was forced to dodge left, right, and center to avoid the unpredictable and often near fatal swings. He knew that even one single cut or drop of blood would be his end, and was beginning to regret letting Hidan initiate the fight. Even so, he held his own, and like a blur of motion, he weaved around every clumsy swing of the scythe. The red steel sometimes coming so close as to lightly skim his coat. Hidan cried out in a mixture of glee and praise, in a mad squeal after every other swing, basking in the joy of a fight, knowing that his opponent's end was coming at any moment. One slip, one wrong placing of their feet, one hesitant moment, and it would be over. He had all the time in the world to wait. He brought the scythe up blindly fast, screaming out as he did so, and brought it crashing down to where he expected Naruto's head to be. In a flash of yellow, Naruto vanished from view, and as per usual, he simply swung his weapon in a long arc around his body. Naruto nearly ducked under the blow, finally managing to get inside the chaotic fanatic's guard, delivering a swift and inefficient kick to the man's side with enough force to send him hurtling across the room. He crashed into the rubble blocking one of the exits. The boulders and debris not enough to arrest his momentum as he was sent crashing through it into the adjoining corridor. Naruto sighed, knowing this wasn't the end of his unrelenting opponent, and quickly dashed through the opening. Kakuzu and the others had been silently observing the swift and shocking fight. Kakuzu was even mentally praising the young blonde. A few people had ever lasted so long that close to Hidan. For now, though, he had other concerns to deal with, namely the three very angry-looking women across the large hall from him. He sighed, wondering if he was truly getting paid enough to have to deal with such annoyances. Very well, we might as well get this started with. I want to get back and get my money. All three women snarled. Each was very powerful in their own right, and there was only one of him. He should be at least worried. Not particularly liking the man by this point, Tayuya decided to kick things off. She unsealed her staff and twirled it once before firmly slamming it into the ground. The sharpened metal edge dug into the ground below. Then, before she passed her lighting chakra through it, the bow staff acted as a conductor, vibrating more rapidly than the human eye can even follow. Immediately, a wave of cracks appeared in the ground in front of her before blasting outwards, uprooting the floor and sending a powerful shockwave towards Kakuzu. Before it could even reach him, large black vine-like tentacles burst forth from his back, appearing in front of him like a protective shield. A thicker thread absorbed all the shock, leaving Kakuzu completely unharmed. Tayuya only smirked. All three women just watched as the Katsuki members sank to his knees, clutching both hands to his head as he rolled. Tayuya had maintained her chakra through the staff, using the shock wave as a medium to transmit a very high-frequency wave that would mess with most people's senses, and in the case of some weaker opponents, knock them out. It was an effective and usually solid strategy that had helped her before, so she was surprised when more of those black threads shot out of Kakuzu, digging deeply into the ground. He stood up again, looking none of the worse for wear as Tayuya realized what he had done to defeat her attack. The threads acted as a grounding device, passing the vibrations out of him and into the ground to be safely dispersed. Tayuya cursed as the effect and damnable tactic before Kakuzu was suddenly attacked from all sides by Sasori's sharp crystal. From all sides by razor sharp crystals. They sprouted from the ground like thorns, trying to skewer the cloaked figure from all angles. Kakuzu merely shattered them all with another wave of his threads, drawing a gasp from Curran, who had never seen anyone destroy her crystal so easily. She was so shocked that she was unprepared for the counterattack as Kakuzu launched her across the room with a swap of his threads. The only thing stopping her bones from being shattered from the impact with the wall was her crystal armor. She groaned as she got up, and the thin layer of rock-hard crystal may have saved her from the worst of the damage, but the impact still left her a little rattled. It unnerved her to see an opponent who she could see was easily as powerful, if not more so, than Orochimaru, unnerved and slightly frightened. Yujito felt that it was her turn, so channeling chakra into her hand, she forced her fingernails to grow into razor-sharp blades, each as hard as diamonds, as they were reinforced with Matatabi's chakra. She rushed Kakuzu, feeling no need to resort to her full transformation scene, as she only had the one opponent now. She skillfully dodged the waves of threads aimed at her body, intent of sweeping her off her feet before incapacitating incapacitating her, and she threw her body to the ground, sliding across the water on her knees with her back spread, with her back pressed to the ground as she evaded a strong blow that would have cracked a few ribs. Immediately after she bent her body back until she was able to use her hands, she launched herself into the air, twisting around yet another attack before using it to propel herself forward. Her hands were held out in front of her, her fingernails ready to tear into the man, willing to attack her home and herself just because of what or who she carried within her. She was a few feet away from the man, who seemed to no more perturbed than when he was joined by Hidan before his eyes narrowed ever so slightly. That was all the warning Yujito got before she saw something shifting beneath his robes, and his hands came up into a single hand sign that Jinchuriki didn't recognize. Wind style, pressure damage. The air around Kakasu seemed to visibly shudder for a moment before finally exploding outwards. It damaged everything in its path, be it wall, floor, or unfortunately Yujito herself. With bone-breaking force, she was launched across the room, arcing up into the air, with her hair trailing beneath her before crashing back down to the ground. She was saved as she saw Tayuya in the periphery of her vision plunge her hands into the ground. The floor seemed to ripple towards her landing zone, and before she knew it, she landed in a soft bed of loose earth, effectively cushioning her fall. Kakasu seemed unfazed that his attack had failed. Instead, everybody noticed something underneath his robe shift again, while he maintained a perfect air of calm that only came with age and experience. Gurren had recovered by now and was throwing countless crystal shuriken at Kakasu, condensing them straight out of the air, which glittered around her. Kakasu stood firm, unwavering as barrage after barrage slowly ripped his cloak to shreds. He had no move to dodge, block, or even he made no move to dodge, block, or even move. Slowly, as more and more of his body was revealed, Gurren began to figure out he had some kind of protection around him, like her crystal armor. Taiyu, on the other hand, knew exactly what it was. Kakatsu's earth heart. As long as he had that heart in his chest, he had a nearly unbreakable defense layer covering his skin. While Gurren was keeping Kakatsu occupied, she quickly made her way over to Yujito, stopping the blonde jerky before she could attack him. It won't work. We need to hit him through the chest when he uses one of his other elemental hearts. Yujito looked at her strangely before remembering that the opponent they were fighting has multiple hearts, each interchangeable and granting him a different elemental affinity. Yujito nodded, turning her attention to where Kakasu was finally growing irritated by the endless hail of razor-sharp crystals. Earth style, earth spears. Gurren's eyes widened before she nimbly jumped backwards, growing a crystal beneath her to propel herself away. She just lifted off the ground as a small shield of spears made from the rock in the room all sprouted from the ground with the intent to screw her. And she was fast, but not fast enough. One managed to skim her side. The only thing protecting her was the thin shield of crystal covering her body. It made a horrible screeching sound as it gouged out a visible trench in the transparent material. Taiyu wasted no time in using that as a distraction, launching herself forward as she batted away the spears with her staff. The lightning in her staff easily overpowered the earthen poles. Lightning being naturally dominant over earth with an incredible show of balance. She planted her staff down on the head of a spear just as it was emerging from the ground. She thrust down using the extra momentum that gave her to soar into the air, twisting her body around more blast threads that tried to flick her away. She smirked as she saw something shift beneath Kakasu's robe just as she approached. It was an unfortunate fact for Kakasu that with age also came predictability, and he had full intent on using that to her advantage. Wind style, great break. Kakasu's eyes widened for a split second as his body jerked violently. Under his mask, his mouth twisted into a pained snarl. He staggered away, looking behind him at Yujito. Her blade-like fingernails are covered in blood. He looked down at his chest as the last of his tattered robe fell away, revealing the patchwork stitching that made up his body. Blood poured from a large punctured wound straight through his chest as Kakazu gasped out in pain. Both Yujito and Gurren looked on confidently adamant that they had won. Yujito smirked as she had a fire affinity, but she always made sure to learn outside her comfort zone. The hiding in water technique was brilliant to catch an unaware enemy off guard, and when an Akatsuki member was no exception, having fallen for their trap. To witnessed Kakasu fight before, this wouldn't be nearly enough to stop him. Sure enough, when they looked over to his crunched over form, they could see his shoulders shake lightly as he let out a low chuckle. Please, little girls, you are 100 years too young to defeat me. He stood up straight, giving Jitoin a full view as black threads covered his heart, replacing it with one from the mask now visible on his back. But it does seem I need to start getting serious. Toyo saw the man's skin change ever so slightly as it darkened, indicating it was the earth heart he was now using. She knew he would have worked out what they were trying to do and would now fight more intelligently. This just became a lot harder. He done the high-pitched screams. He done the high-pitched screams. He screams as he swung his scythe madly, were really grating on Naruto's ears as he continued to swiftly dodge every potential blow. If Hidan was upset or aggravated by Naruto's continued avoidance of his weapon, he showed no sign of it. Instead, the man just maintained a psychotic grin as he gleefully continued to twirl in his own chaotic dance of destruction. Naruto tried to get back and get some distance between him and his opponent, but Hidan simply let loose with his scythe, sending it flying on its metal tether, which Naruto was beginning to suspect he could control with chakra. The scythe itself seemed unbreakable. The blonde had already tried to snap it with a Rasengan, but it was fruitless. Likewise, any blows that Naruto did were nothing. Naruto did manage to get in, were simply shrugged off like they were nothing. Hidan was tough. At first, Naruto had difficulty believing Takuya about the man's immortality, but after a few minutes fighting him, he lost all doubts. The man could ignore kunai cuts like they were bug bites, powering through with a smile or a demented shriek of joy. If anything, Hidan seemed to derive some kind of sick pleasure every time he was hurt. Still, Naruto couldn't afford to get sloppy. Hidan didn't tire. Naruto would eventually, and then he would make a mistake. The red steel of the scythe glinted in anticipation of the blonde's blood. Just one drop, and Hidan could end it all. Naruto knew all about the self-harm ritual of the Joshin follower. He would take pleasure in inflicting pain to both himself and his victim until he ended it with a stab to the heart. Naruto had a plan, but he didn't foresee fighting Hidan in such a confined place. He needed somewhere more open. The next chance he got, Naruto kicked Hidan with as much power he could muster. The Akatsuki member was sent flying back through the corridor they had been fighting in, sailing out into the main hall as Naruto followed suit. He saw the girls fending off Kakasu, but he couldn't stop in to help, at least not yet. Instead, he used their fight to his advantage as a plan formed in his mind on the fly. Racing over Hidan's temporarily down body, he used Kakasu's distracted state to launch himself over the man. He was forced to dodge a few errant tentacles, which reminded him of evading Guard's hand, but he didn't touch down behind the former. But he did manage to touch down behind the former Tankinin Shinobi. In a flurry of movement, he firmly stuck a tag on Kakasu's back. The intricate seal glowing briefly, but there was a small explosion of smoke. But when it cleared, Kakasu was nowhere in sight. Instead, there stood two Narutos. The original quickly mustered all the strength he could and leapt onto the wall, running up until he was lost in the shadows. Kakasu was oddly surprised by the maneuver and only saw the shadow bearing down on him. When it was too late, in a flash of red steel, a large bloody gash appeared across Kakasu's chest before Hidan jumped back with a mirthful smile. "It's finally over, brat. You thought you could evade me, but no one can escape Joshin-sama." Hidan temporarily transformed into Naruto and just widened his eyes as he realized what was going on. "Hidan, you moron, wait!" But it was too late. The silver-haired man licked the triangle blood of the scythe, drinking it down as he prepared himself for the ritual that had become second nature for him now. With glee, he traced out the symbol of his religion into the ground below him from what blood was falling from his own body. His skin already changing. All over his body became a black as bone like decals ordained his face, and what you could see and what you could see of his arms and chest. He smiled gleefully, too lost in the joy of his sacrifice to listen to the rest of his companions' pleas. With sadistic pleasure, he ran his sacrificial blade across the skin of his arms, smiling evilly as similar wounds appeared on Kakuzu's transformed body. Years of life, and the years of life and the Earth Grudge fear jutsu had numbed the ancient Taki shinobi to pain, and he showed no outward sign of being affected. This seemed to anger Kidan greatly. He wanted to hear the cries of his victim ring out from the hall. "You aren't a worthy sacrifice, not even a single scream." Without much more debate, he plunged the knife into his heart as Kakuzu doubled over, feeling his precious organ burst inside his own body. Hidan smirked at seeing his opponent finally die after putting up a valiant attempt, at least until the original Naruto dropped down from the ceiling. The second member of the zombie combo watched in irritation as the Naruto he had killed transformed back into Kakuzu. He pointed and a cursed finger at Naruto, murder in his eyes. "You tricked me, punk!" Naruto smirked at how angry the man had gotten. It wasn't all that hard, really. A large take mark appeared on Hidan's forehead as he once again charged at Naruto, a blood-curdling scream of anger and slight glee once again emerging from his throat. Naruto simply dodged the clumsy attack, firmly punching Hidan in the back, sending the man through one of the blocked-off passages. Again, Naruto sighed despite the danger Hidan posed. He really wasn't all that much of a fighter once you knew what to look out for. Weirdly, he followed the small trail of destruction his body had created, now intent on actually finishing this. Gurren and Yujiro were now much more wary of Kakuzu, despite his seemingly mortal wound. Sure enough, the hole in his chest closed over, a new heart moving to replace its destroyed comrade. Although they couldn't be sure which, Kakuzu, far from his usual calm and collected demeanor, was now highly agitated. The loss of his wind heart he could deal with. Those were a dime a dozen in Wind Country, but a decent Earth heart was difficult to find for him to get. Usually to subdue a powerful Earth affinity shinobi, you need to use lightning techniques. Those didn't generally leave much to scavenging from. "Hidan, you imbecile!" It was a growl more than a sentence as he looked around at his three opponents. With only 3 hearts left, he had to be careful. Quickly devising a strategy from years of experience in the battlefield, he placed his hands in a seal. Water style, water shockwave. Water seemed to converge out of thin air, joining the tepid water already frowning through the large hall. It rose up in a large wave before come crashing down on the 3 women, forcing them to dodge out of the way. Of course, Kakuzu knew that the attack wouldn't be nearly enough to deal with his opponents, but it did give him enough time, so they dodged enough time to dodge out of its way. Using that to his advantage, he hunched over his 2 remaining masks separated from his body, getting their own life with the black threads that composed his body. After the threads writhed around for a moment, they began to take on forms with the mask acting as heads. One became a demonic, twisted visage that faintly resembled a tiger, while the other grew tall white spikes emerging from its shoulders. Both looked dangerous, both looked vicious, and both were staring straight at their intended targets. As the 3 women landed from dodging the water attack, Taguya and Gurren gulped as they saw the strange humanoid creatures staring at them. There was a single second of perfect silence as everybody in the room just stared at one another. Then, on some unspoken signal, it all began. Simultaneously, the 2 black creatures charged down to Taguya and Gurren, the tall one aiming for the latter, and the tiger like one the former. Kakuzu, on the other hand, immediately turned his attention to Yuto, who all of a sudden felt very alone with the imposing man staring her down with his disappointing dispassionate green and red eyes. She didn't want him to have the first move, so she immediately formed a series of rapid and complex hand seals. Fire style, fire dragon, flame bullets. Yujiro forced her chakra with immense control. Focused her chakra with immense control as it took on the appearance of an enormous dragon composed entirely of bright white flames. It reared its head and roared. The room shuddered from the noise, while Kakuzu Kakuzu remained unimpressed. The dragon immediately began spitting out intense flames, the same color as his body, all of them on a collision course with Kakuzu's body. Water style, great encampment wall from the water surrounding Kakuzu, and the extra he had added with his last technique. A thick wall of water erupted all around the Takeshinobi. When the two jutsus collided, there was a great explosion that once again rocked the large room, steam being released from the heat of the flames. Despite the power of Yujito's technique, she could clearly see Kakuzu standing perfectly still, not having moved at all. She gulped, knowing what was the most powerful jutsu in her arsenal. Kakuzu just smiled. End of chapter 50.